Gabriel Mercer walked into his own restaurant after a blood-soaked deal, and he stopped cold the moment he heard a young woman's muffled sobs. Only a few minutes earlier, he'd just finished a so-called deal, the blood still clinging to the cuffs of his shirt. That was his work. That was his life. Gabriel Mercer, 36 years old, the owner of one of the largest underground empires in Los Angeles. But tonight, he wasn't coming to Obsidian as a kingpin. He came as an ordinary guest. No entourage, no advance notice, no one knowing he'd show up. It had been Gabriel's habit for years. He believed the truth of a place didn't live in financial reports or pretty numbers on paper. It lived in the tired eyes of employees after a graveyard shift, in the sighs tucked into a kitchen corner, in the whispered conversations a manager never heard. Obsidian was his high-end restaurant in downtown LA, one of the most perfect, legitimate fronts he'd ever built. From the outside, it was where Hollywood's elite came for Wagyu beef and fine wine. From the inside, it was Gabriel's eyes and ears on the ground. On a Friday night, the restaurant was packed tight. The air carried the soft perfume of garlic butter and grilled meat. Candlelight flickered across white tablecloths, and the diner's laughter mingled with a gentle wash of jazz. At first glance, everything was flawless, but Gabriel had lived long enough in the dark to know appearances could lie. He stepped in, chose a seat near the bar, and let his gaze sweep the room out of habit. And then he saw him. Derek Lawson, the restaurant manager, stood at the edge of the floor with his hands folded across his chest. He watched the staff with a look Gabriel recognized instantly. It wasn't the look of a manager supervising work. It was the look of a predator stalking prey. A look of control, possession, threat. Gabriel's brow tightened, just slightly. Something was wrong. Then he heard it. A small sound, strangled and trembling, drifting from the hallway that led to the staff break room. Crying. Not loud or theatrical. The kind of crying someone tries to swallow, tries to push back down, tries to keep from falling apart in public. Gabriel rose and moved slowly toward it. The break room door was ajar. Through the narrow opening, he saw her. A young woman, appearing to be in her late 20s, wearing the Obsidian staff uniform. She stood with her head bowed, both hands gripping the edge of a table as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her shoulders shook, stifled hiccups slipped through, lips pressed tight. Beside her, a young man in the same uniform was saying something in an urgent whisper. Gabriel couldn't make out the words. He didn't need to. The image said everything. This young woman was afraid, not a passing fear, but the kind that had taken root deep inside, gnawing at her day by day. Then she lifted her head. The light fell across her face, and Gabriel froze. Her eyes were green, clear as jade, but threaded with fractures of grief. Those eyes made Gabriel's heart feel as if someone had closed a fist around it. He knew those eyes. He'd seen those eyes before. 8 years ago, on a night soaked in blood, when a man went down in his arms, green eyes still open, a mouth whispering last words that never made it whole. Gabriel took a step back, his breathing suddenly heavy. It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But the instinct of a man who'd survived hundreds of battles told him the opposite. Those eyes were not an accident. That girl was not an accident, appearing here. Gabriel turned away and walked back toward the bar at an unhurried pace. He sat down, ordered a glass of water, and began to watch. Tonight, he wouldn't leave, not until he found out who the girl with the green eyes was, and why, when he looked at her, he felt the ghost of his past come crawling back. If you want to know what happens next, please hit like and share this video right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next parts of the story. Gabriel noticed that the young man who had been comforting the girl a moment ago had returned to the dining room. He wore the Obsidian uniform, an order pad in hand, yet his eyes kept flicking toward the hallway now and then, worry written too plainly to hide. Gabriel rose and walked at an unhurried pace toward the service area. He needed information, and this young man might be the first piece of the puzzle. Gabriel stopped beside the napkin station and pretended to search for something. "Hey, can I borrow a pen?" The young man turned, startled for a beat. His name tag read Ryan Torres. He handed the pen over with cautious restraint. Gabriel took it, but didn't move away. He looked at Ryan with a calm, even gaze. His voice lowered. "That girl earlier, your friend, she doesn't look okay." Ryan went rigid. His eyes blinked fast, then dropped to the floor. "She's fine." The answer came too quickly, too neat, too defensive. Gabriel had questioned every kind of man long enough to know when someone was lying, and Ryan was lying, not because he wanted to conceal something, but because he was afraid. Gabriel didn't press. He simply stood there in silence, his expression composed, his eyes never leaving Ryan. Silence had its own weight. It pressed down on people, made them want to fill the empty space with words. And Ryan, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't escape that rule. Her name's Grace. Ryan let out a breath, his voice dropping smaller. She's been here more than a year. Best person in this place. Never complains. Never takes a day off. Gabriel gave a slight nod, urging him to go on. But she doesn't have a choice. Ryan swallowed, his hands tightening around the order pad. Her mother died a few years ago from cancer, left behind hospital debt, $127,000. Grace had to drop out of school, work 2 or 3 jobs at the same time to pay it off. Then she came here. Ryan's voice turned bitter. Derek, that manager, he knows Grace's situation. He forces her onto night shifts over and over, makes her work overtime without pay. She can't say no because she's scared of losing her job. And losing her job means... He didn't finish the sentence, but Gabriel understood. Losing the job meant losing everything. It meant sinking deeper into the mud she was fighting to climb out of. Is there anything else? Gabriel asked, still steady, though his eyes had darkened. Ryan opened his mouth to add more, but suddenly he stopped. His gaze slid past Gabriel's shoulder, and his face blanched in an instant. Gabriel didn't need to turn to know who was coming. He felt the shift in the air, felt the knife-edge stare drilling into the back of his neck. I have to work, Ryan said quickly, bowing his head, fumbling at the stack of napkins as if arranging them mattered more than breathing. Sorry, I can't talk long. Then he slipped away like a rabbit that had caught the scent of a fox. Gabriel stayed where he was, the pen still in his hand. He didn't turn around, but he knew Derek Lawson was standing right behind him. Gabriel didn't hurry to turn around and face Derek. Instead, he calmly slipped the pen into his jacket pocket and moved toward the bar as if nothing had happened. He took a seat on a high stool in a shadowed corner, a place where he could watch the entire restaurant without drawing attention. Behind the bar stood a man of about 32, brown-haired, solid-built, polishing a glass with the practiced ease of a professional bartender, Jake Morrison. But Jake wasn't just a bartender. He was Gabriel's man. Planted in Obsidian 2 years earlier to monitor the restaurant's activity and report anything out of the ordinary, Jake caught sight of Gabriel and didn't show surprise or shift his expression. He simply stepped closer, his hand still moving over the glass, and asked the way a bartender would to any regular customer. What can I get you, sir? Gabriel answered softly. Whiskey. Neat. Jake nodded and turned to reach for the bottle. When he set the glass in front of Gabriel, his voice dropped low enough that only the two of them could hear. Derek Lawson. There's a problem. Gabriel took a sip of whiskey, eyes fixed straight ahead. Talk. Jake kept wiping down the bar, his motions smooth and ordinary, as if no conversation was happening at all. He makes secret calls after his shift. Always goes out to the back alley, talks for a long time, then comes back in like nothing happened. I tried to listen, but he's careful. Gabriel said nothing, waiting. There's more. Jake flicked a quick glance toward Derek, who was standing out on the floor, then went on. Strangers come to see him regularly, about once every 2 weeks. They don't come through the front door. They use the back. I haven't gotten a clear look at their faces, but they don't move like regular customers. The way they walk, the way they look around. They've got a smell. Gabriel understood what that smell meant. It was the kind of instinct people in the underworld carried. The ability to recognize their own kind by the way they moved through space. What else? Jake stopped polishing for a moment, his voice dropping into something heavier. There's something strange. He asks a lot about the employee named Grace, not about her work or her performance. He asks about her family, especially about her father. Gabriel set his whiskey down, the motion slower than usual. Her father? Yeah, Jake nodded. He asked who her father is, what he did, when he died. Like he's searching for something, or confirming something. Gabriel went silent. The instincts of a Mafia boss were screaming inside his head. An ordinary restaurant manager had no reason to care about the father of a server, unless he wasn't an ordinary manager, unless he had someone over him, unless Grace wasn't a random target. Gabriel stood, leaving several bills on the bar. Before he walked away, he spoke low to Jake. Keep watching. Any movement from Derek, you let me know immediately. Jake nodded and returned to work as if the conversation had never happened. Gabriel had barely left the bar when he felt a shift in the air. Someone was moving toward him. Footsteps steady, deliberate, not hurried yet not slow, either. He turned. Derek Lawson was walking straight at him, a professional smile on his mouth while his eyes stayed cold as ice. The 44-year-old manager was tall and lean, hair neatly combed, his dark suit unwrinkled to perfection. From the outside, he looked like the ideal high-end restaurant manager. But Gabriel had seen too many men like him to be fooled by appearances. And the men who wore masks best were often the most dangerous. "Good evening, sir." Derek stopped a few steps away, polite in tone, though something sharp lived underneath it. "I'm Derek Lawson, the manager of Obsidian. I noticed you've been seated here quite a while tonight. Is there anything I can assist you with?" Gabriel smiled, friendly, the way any ordinary guest might. "No, thank you. I'm just enjoying the atmosphere. This place is impressive." Derek nodded, but his gaze didn't leave Gabriel. "Are you here alone?" "Yes." "First time?" Gabriel tipped his head slightly, as if thinking, "Not exactly. I've stopped by a few times. I like the Wagyu here." That was true. Gabriel had been to Obsidian many times, though always under different circumstances, wearing different covers. Derek had no reason to recognize him, but Derek didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He stepped a little closer, narrowing his eyes as if trying to place a memory. "You look familiar," he said slowly, each word measured, weighed. "I have the feeling I've seen you somewhere before. Could you tell me your name?" The air thickened all at once. Gabriel felt the tension hidden inside that question. This wasn't the casual curiosity of a restaurant manager. This was probing. If Derek knew who he was, everything would become far more complicated. But Gabriel wasn't a man who was easily shaken. He'd faced worse than this 100 times over. He looked Derek straight in the eye, his expression perfectly calm. "I've got a pretty common face. People tell me I look like this person or that person. Maybe you've mistaken me for someone else." Derek didn't answer right away. He kept studying Gabriel for a few seconds, like he was searching for a crack in the disguise. But Gabriel gave him nothing. At last, Derek smiled, though the smile never reached his eyes. "Maybe so. I apologize if I've bothered you." He stepped back, yet still didn't take his eyes off Gabriel. "If you need anything at all, just call for one of the staff. I hope you have a wonderful evening." Gabriel nodded, keeping the friendly smile in place. "Thank you." Derek turned and walked back toward the dining floor. But Gabriel didn't miss that moment. As Derek passed the section where Grace was working, he looked at her. Just a glance, less than a second. But Gabriel saw it. That wasn't a boss looking at an employee. That was possession. The look of a man who saw her as something that belonged to him. The look of a predator guarding his prey. Grace seemed to feel it. She shivered slightly, her shoulders tightening for a brief moment. Then she lowered her head and kept working as if nothing had happened. But Gabriel saw her hands tremble faintly as she set a plate down on the table. She was afraid, not afraid of losing her job. Afraid of Derek. Afraid of what he could do to her. Gabriel turned back toward the bar and pretended to order another drink. But from the corner of his eye, he saw Derek speaking with a male employee in a far corner. Derek said something, then nodded in Gabriel's direction. The employee glanced at Gabriel, then nodded back. Gabriel understood immediately. Derek was ordering the man to watch him. Derek didn't trust him. He was suspicious, and he wanted to know who Gabriel really was. Gabriel took a sip of whiskey, his face still calm, as if nothing was happening. But in his mind, the pieces were sliding into place. Derek wasn't an ordinary manager. He made secret calls. Strangers came to see him on a regular schedule. And he had a particular interest in Grace, especially her father. Now he was wary of Gabriel, ordering someone to tail him as if Gabriel were a threat. This man had a boss, and his boss clearly wasn't ordinary. Gabriel set his glass down and stood. He needed to know more. He needed to know who Grace really was, and he needed to understand why those green eyes haunted him so fiercely. Gabriel stepped out of the restaurant and stood in the dim, shadowed parking lot. He needed air. He needed to think. But when he turned and looked back through the glass, his gaze caught Grace by accident. She was standing at the register, her head slightly bowed, loose strands of hair falling forward to veil part of her face. Then she lifted her eyes, and the light struck straight into the green of them, and Gabriel's world went still. Those eyes, a green so clear it looked like jade, with tiny flecks of gold scattered around the pupil. Eyes he'd seen once before, 8 years ago, on the most horrific night of his life. The memory crashed over him like a tidal wave, dragging him into a past he'd tried to bury for 8 years. That night, Gabriel was 28. He was sitting in an armored car with his father, Robert Mercer, on the way home after an important meeting. His father was the head of the Mercer Empire, one of the largest underground forces in Los Angeles, and Gabriel was the only heir. Thomas Sullivan sat in the front passenger seat, as always. He was the most loyal bodyguard the Mercer family had, a man who'd served Gabriel's father for more than 20 years. A man of few words, hard as iron, with green eyes that never stopped watching. Gabriel had grown up with Thomas like he was an uncle, a teacher, a silent protector. No one imagined what was about to happen. The car had barely turned onto an empty road when everything exploded. Blinding headlights flared from up ahead. Tires screamed against the pavement. Then gunfire. Dozens of shots tore the night apart, punching through bullet-resistant glass like it was paper. Gabriel's father collapsed instantly, blood bursting from his chest. Gabriel shouted, reaching for him. But a powerful hand shoved him down onto the floor of the car. Thomas Sullivan. Thomas covered Gabriel with his own body while his other hand kept firing back at the attackers. But there were too many of them. Too many guns. A bullet ripped through Thomas's shoulder. Then another slammed into his back. Then another. Thomas still didn't fall. He stayed there, shielding Gabriel, returning fire until he ran out of bullets. Then he went down. Gabriel caught Thomas, and Thomas's blood soaked through Gabriel's clothes. The gunfire had stopped. The attackers had pulled back, probably believing everyone was dead. But Gabriel was alive, because of Thomas. "Thomas, hold on. I'll call someone," Gabriel said, his voice shaking. Thomas looked at him, his green eyes already beginning to dim. He tried to smile, but blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. "Live," he whispered, each word taking what little strength he had left. "My daughter, Grace, please." He didn't finish. Those green eyes stayed open, but the light inside them went out. Thomas Sullivan died in Gabriel's arms, leaving behind an unfinished last request about the daughter he loved. Gabriel had tried to find her. After Thomas's funeral, after he took revenge on the men who ambushed them, Gabriel gave the order to locate Thomas's family. But every record had been wiped clean, as if someone had deliberately hidden them away. And then life swallowed Gabriel into the churn of power, of territorial wars, of rebuilding the empire from ashes. Little by little, he forgot Thomas's last words. Until tonight, Gabriel blinked and came back to the present. He was still standing in the parking lot, watching Grace through the glass. The green eyes, the dark brown hair, the shape of her face. Everything looked like Thomas Sullivan so intensely it stole his breath. "It can't be," Gabriel whispered, his voice rough. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus Webb, his most loyal second in command. Marcus picked up after the first ring. "Boss?" "Marcus," Gabriel said, his voice cold and sharp as a blade. "Investigate someone named Grace. She works at Obsidian. I need to know everything about her. Who her father is, who her mother is, where she lives, everything." "Understood. How soon?" "Right now." Gabriel ended the call, his eyes never leaving Grace. If she really was Thomas Sullivan's daughter, then he owed her 8 years. 8 years living alone, with no one to protect her, no one to shield her, while he, the man her father died to save, hadn't even known she existed. Gabriel sat in the black Bentley, parked in a shadowed corner of the lot, his eyes still fixed on the Obsidian restaurant. Inside, Grace was still working, still trying to make it through one more night beneath Derek Lawson's hunting gaze, and she had no idea that her life was about to change completely. Gabriel glanced at his watch. It had been 20 minutes since he'd called Marcus. 20 minutes in which every second stretched as long as an hour. He tried to hold his impatience in check, but his heart was pounding at a rhythm he couldn't control. If she truly was Thomas Sullivan's daughter, then he'd failed the man who'd sacrificed his life to save him. 8 years she'd been out there alone, and he hadn't known. The phone buzzed. "Marcus." Gabriel answered immediately. "Talk." Marcus's voice was low and serious, as always. "I found the information, boss, and you're going to want to stay seated when you hear this." Gabriel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I'm listening." "That girl's full name is Grace Sullivan, 27 years old, the only daughter of Thomas Sullivan." Gabriel's heart seemed to miss a beat. He'd suspected it. He'd felt it in his bones, but hearing it confirmed still hit him like a fist to the chest. "Continue." Marcus drew a breath. "Her file is pretty tragic, boss. After Thomas died, his wife Linda Sullivan raised Grace alone. She worked herself to the bone to get her daughter through college. But 6 years ago, she was diagnosed with terminal stage cancer. She died after 10 months fighting the illness, leaving Grace with hospital debt of $127,000. Gabriel closed his eyes. $127,000. To him, it was a small sum, nothing. But to a young woman with no family, no support, it was a mountain heavy enough to crush a life. She had to drop out in her 3rd year of college, Marcus continued. Since then, she's worked every job she could to pay the debt. Waitressing, grocery store work, office cleaning. She started at Obsidian about 14 months ago. 8 years, Gabriel murmured, his voice thick and low. 8 years she's lived on her own. No one helped her. No one protected her. He thought of Thomas Sullivan, the man who died in his arms with an unfinished last request about his daughter. He thought of those green eyes, still open after life had slipped away. Thomas had wanted him to do something for Grace, and he had failed. There's more, boss. Marcus's voice tightened. About Derek Lawson. You're not going to like this. Gabriel opened his eyes, his instincts flaring. Say it. Derek Lawson isn't an ordinary manager. He has ties to Victor Crane. That name, the name Gabriel had believed he'd buried with the past. He went still, his fingers clamping around the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Victor Crane is dead, Gabriel said, his voice ice cold. 8 years ago, after the ambush, I ordered his entire faction wiped out. He died in that. He didn't die, boss, Marcus replied, his voice heavy. I don't know how, but he got out. For 8 years, he's been hiding, rebuilding his force slowly, and Derek Lawson is one of his most trusted men. Rage surged up inside Gabriel's chest. Victor Crane, the man who'd organized that ambush, the man who'd killed his father, the man who'd indirectly killed Thomas Sullivan. He was still alive. There's more, Marcus said. I dug deeper into the connection between Derek and Grace. And this is the part you're going to want to hear most. Gabriel waited, each second slicing at him like a blade against skin. Victor Crane knows who Grace is. He knows she's Thomas Sullivan's daughter, and he deliberately arranged for her to get a job at Obsidian. What? Gabriel snarled. Thomas Sullivan once ruined a major plan of Victor's before the ambush happened. Victor never forgot it. He wants revenge, and the way he chose is to use Thomas's daughter. Marcus fell silent for a moment, as if weighing how to say what came next. Derek was planted there to watch Grace, to control her. He asked about Thomas because he needed to confirm she was the right target, and from what I've gathered, Victor has a plan for her. I don't know what that plan is yet, but it's definitely not anything good. Gabriel sat there, silent. In his mind, every piece was locking into place, forming a dark picture. Grace hadn't ended up at Obsidian by chance. She was a target, a pawn in Victor Crane's revenge, and she had no idea. Boss? Marcus spoke again after the silence. How do you want to handle this? Gabriel drew a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was cold as steel. Tonight, deal with Derek. Clean. No traces. And Victor Crane. He paused, his eyes fixed on the restaurant, where Grace was still working, unaware she was standing in the middle of a war she didn't even know existed. Victor Crane has been running for 8 years, but he won't run again. Gabriel stepped back into Obsidian with one purpose, and one purpose only. He needed to talk to Grace. He needed to tell her the truth. The restaurant was still crowded, the music still drifting through the air, but Gabriel wasn't paying attention to any of it anymore. His eyes swept across the dining floor, searching for the girl with the green eyes. She wasn't there. Gabriel frowned and moved quickly toward the hallway that led to the staff area, and then he heard Derek's voice, cold and threatening, carrying from the corner of the hall. Tonight, after we close, you know what you're supposed to do. Grace's answer came back, small and trembling. I can't, please. You don't have the right to refuse. Derek cut in, his voice like a blade. You think you've got a choice? You're buried in debt. No family. No one protecting you. One word from me and you're out on the street immediately. And believe me, no one's going to hire a little girl like you. Silence. Then Derek's footsteps sounded, moving away. Gabriel pressed himself into the corner of the wall, letting Derek pass without noticing him. The manager's face was ice, his eyes black as a bottomless pit. Gabriel had to restrain every instinct to grab the man by the throat right then and there. Not yet. Derek would pay, but not now. When Derek had disappeared completely, Gabriel stepped into the hallway. Grace was leaning against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to keep from breaking apart. Her shoulders trembled, her breathing was fast, her eyes were red, but there were no tears. She'd cried so much she had nothing left to cry. Grace, Gabriel called softly. She startled and lifted her head. When she realized the man in front of her was the strange guest she'd seen in the restaurant tonight, she straightened quickly, trying to pull herself back into composure. What do you need, sir? This area is employees only. I know. Gabriel stepped a little closer, his voice gentler than usual. "I'm not here as a customer. I need to talk to you." Grace looked at him warily. "About what?" Gabriel drew a deep breath. He'd prepared for this moment, but facing those green eyes that matched Thomas Sullivan down to the smallest detail, still made it feel like someone was squeezing his heart shut. "I need to talk to you about Thomas Sullivan." Grace's face went rigid, as if it had turned to stone. She stared at Gabriel, eyes widening, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak but couldn't get the words out. Then she took a step back until her spine met the wall. "You knew my father?" Her voice was no more than a whisper. Gabriel nodded. "I knew him. He worked for my family more than 20 years. "Worked?" Grace shook her head, confusion spilling across her features. "My father was a truck driver. He died in a traffic accident 8 years ago. My mother said, 'Your mother didn't tell you the truth.'" Gabriel cut in, his voice gentle but firm. "Thomas Sullivan wasn't a truck driver. He was a bodyguard. The most loyal bodyguard my family had, and he didn't die in an accident." Grace stood there, unable to speak. She looked at Gabriel as if he'd started talking in a language she didn't understand. 8 years ago, my father and I were ambushed on our way home," Gabriel continued, his voice dropping lower. "There was a traitor, someone who wanted us dead. That night, dozens of guns were aimed at us. My father died in the first burst of bullets." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "And I survived because of Thomas Sullivan. He used his body to shield me. He took bullet after bullet meant for me, and he kept firing back until he had nothing left." Tears began to slide down Grace's cheeks. She didn't sob. She didn't cry out loud. She only stood there with quiet tears falling. "Your father died in my arms," Gabriel said, his voice rough. "The last thing he said was about you. He said your name. He wanted me to promise something, but he couldn't finish. He left this world with an unfinished last request about the daughter he loved most in the world." Grace covered her mouth, a strangled sob breaking free. Her knees seemed to want to fold, but she forced herself to stay standing, pressed to the wall as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling. 8 years, she whispered, her voice splitting apart. 8 years I believed my father died in an accident. 8 years I thought he left in a meaningless way. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did my mother lie to me? "Maybe she was trying to protect you," Gabriel said. "The world your father lived in, the world I live in. It isn't meant for ordinary people. Your mother probably wanted you far away from all of it." Grace shook her head, tears still coming. "But I had the right to know. My father was a hero. He died to save someone else. I had the right to be proud of that instead of thinking he died in some ordinary truck accident." Gabriel didn't answer. He understood her anger. He understood her pain. And he knew there were no words that could close the wound that had just been torn open inside her. But he could do something else. "Grace," he said, his voice gentle but certain. She looked up at him through the veil of tears. "I owe your father my life, and I failed to find you for 8 years. But now I've found you." He looked straight into her eyes, his voice like a vow. "I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. No one." Grace was still standing there, the tears not yet dry on her cheeks, when a figure appeared at the far end of the hallway. Derek Lawson, the manager, came forward with heavy steps, his eyes narrowing when he saw Gabriel standing in front of Grace. His face flickered for an instant, then settled back into its usual coldness. "Grace," Derek said, his voice sharp as a knife, "what are you doing back here? A table is waiting at number 7. Grace immediately lowered her head, the reflex of someone who'd grown used to being controlled. She hurriedly wiped her tears with the back of her hand and prepared to move. Her body obeyed Derek's command like a puppet, without thinking, without questioning. It was the habit of a year lived in fear. But before she could step past Gabriel, he lifted an arm and blocked her. "She's not going anywhere." Gabriel's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an absolute command. Grace stopped, staring at him in confusion. Derek stopped too, his gaze darkening. "Excuse me?" He moved closer, wearing the threatening posture he'd used to break so many employees. "I don't know who you are, but this is my restaurant, and Grace is my employee. She has work to do. You should leave before I call security." Gabriel didn't move. He stood there, calm as a mountain, his eyes on Derek with a chill that only men who'd looked death in the face could possess. "Who are you?" Derek demanded, irritation creeping into his voice. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially in front of staff. "Why do you care about a waitress like that?" Gabriel watched him for a moment longer, like he was weighing an insect before deciding whether to crush it. Then, slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out a card. He held it out for Derek to see. "I'm Gabriel Mercer," he said evenly, "owner of Obsidian, and of 17 other restaurants under the Mercer Group." The air in the hallway seemed to freeze. Derek stared at the card, then at Gabriel, then back at the card. His face shifted from confusion to horror as he realized Gabriel wasn't joking. Mercer. That name didn't only represent a restaurant group. In the underworld of Los Angeles, Mercer was an empire, and Gabriel Mercer was the uncrowned king of that empire. Mr. Mercer? Derek stammered, all his confidence bursting like a soap bubble. "I didn't know you were coming tonight. If I had, I would've." "Would've what?" Gabriel cut him off, his voice cold as ice. "Treated the staff better? Not forced them into unpaid overtime? Not threatened them by exploiting their hardship?" Derek went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "I heard everything," Gabriel continued, each word a knife. "I heard you threaten her. I heard you say she has no choice. I heard you say you'd fire her if she didn't do what you wanted." He stepped one pace closer. Derek stepped back until his spine hit the wall. "And that's not all, is it?" Gabriel lowered his voice so only Derek could hear. "You think I don't know about your secret calls? You think I don't know who you work for?" Derek's face turned the color of paper. His eyes blinked hard and fast, and Gabriel could see sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Mr. Mercer, I can explain." "You don't need to," Gabriel cut in. He turned to Grace, who stood there stunned, unable to believe what she was witnessing. The strange customer she'd spoken with, the man who'd told her about her father, was the owner of the restaurant where she worked. He was one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. "Grace," Gabriel said softly, "you don't have to be afraid of him anymore. You don't have to listen to anything he says anymore. From this moment on, he has no power over you." Grace looked at him, her green eyes still red from crying. But now something else had entered them. Hope. Something she hadn't dared to have for an entire year. Gabriel turned back to Derek. The manager was shaking, his legs threatening to give out. All the power he'd once had, all the control he'd clung to, was dissolving in front of the true owner of this place. "And you," Gabriel said, his voice stripped of emotion. "You made the biggest mistake of your life when you touched someone I intend to protect." Derek swallowed, trying to force words out. "Mr. Mercer, I beg." "Office." Gabriel cut him off, his voice a final order. "Now." Derek didn't dare say another word. He bowed his head and trudged toward the manager's office at the end of the hall. Gabriel followed, but before he left, he looked back at Grace one more time. "Wait here for me. It won't be long." Then he walked away, leaving Grace standing there alone, with 1,000 questions in her mind and a strange feeling in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone was truly on her side. The office door closed behind Gabriel with a dry, clicking sound. The room wasn't large, just big enough for a desk, a few chairs, and a filing cabinet. Derek stood in the middle, his back slightly hunched, his hands laced together in a nervous knot. He tried to force a smile, but it came out crooked and trembling, as if the muscles in his face had forgotten how to smile a long time ago. "Mr. Mercer, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," Derek began, his voice trying for calm but unable to hide the panic underneath. "About that employee, I was only managing in my own way. Maybe a bit strict, but—" "Stop!" Gabriel cut him off, his voice cold as steel. He didn't sit down, didn't move, only stood there watching Derek with the eyes of a predator studying its prey. "I didn't come here to listen to you justify your management style." Derek swallowed, the fake smile fading away. "Then what do you want?" Gabriel stepped closer, then another step, until he was right in front of Derek, close enough to see sweat sliding down the man's temple. "I know you work for Victor Crane." Those 5 words hit Derek like 5 bullets through the chest. The manager went rigid, his face draining to the color of paper, his eyes widening in terror. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. "You think I wouldn't know?" Gabriel went on, his voice still even, but every word landing like a hammer. "The secret calls after work. The strangers who meet you on a regular schedule. The way you've been asking about Grace Sullivan, about her father. You think no one notices?" Derek backed up until his spine met the wall. There was nowhere left to go. "Mr. Mercer, I can explain." "No," Gabriel cut him off. "You won't explain. You'll answer, and you get one chance to answer correctly." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Where is Victor Crane?" Derek trembled. He looked at Gabriel, then at the door, as if he were weighing whether he could run. But they both knew it was pointless. No one ran from Gabriel Mercer. I don't know. Wrong. Gabriel took another step, his face now only inches from Derek's. Tell me where Victor is. Or I'll make you tell me. His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made Derek understand this wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise, and Gabriel Mercer always kept his promises. Derek collapsed. Not physically, but whatever was left of his spirit gave out completely. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and when he finally spoke, it was only a desperate whisper. Victor's in an old warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles, south of the city, near an abandoned industrial zone. Gabriel stayed still, waiting. He's been watching you for 3 years, Derek went on, his voice shaking. He knows everything about you. Your schedule, the places you go, the people close to you. He's been waiting for the right moment to strike. And Grace? Derek swallowed, not daring to look up. Grace is his main target. Thomas Sullivan ruined a major plan of Victor's before the ambush happened. Victor wants revenge. He wants to use Thomas's daughter too. He stopped, afraid to finish. To what? Gabriel asked, his voice turning dangerous. To torture you, Derek whispered. He wants you to watch her suffer before he kills you. He said that's the perfect revenge. Killing the daughter of the man who died saving you, right in front of you. The room sank into silence. Gabriel stood there, his face giving nothing away. But inside him, rage was boiling like lava. Victor Crane, the man who killed his father, the man who indirectly killed Thomas Sullivan. And now he wanted to use Grace to complete his symphony of revenge. Gabriel pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Human Resources, he said when the call connected. Derek Lawson, manager of Obsidian. Terminate him immediately. Reason, severe violation of company policy. Handle the paperwork and get him out of the restaurant within 15 minutes. He ended the call, then dialed another number. Marcus, Derek Lawson will be leaving the restaurant in 15 minutes. His voice was ice. Deal with him when he steps out. Clean. Derek heard everything. His face shifted from paper white to a sick gray. He knew what clean meant. Mr. Mercer, please. Gabriel didn't look at him. He turned and walked to the door. You chose the wrong side, he said, his voice empty of emotion. And now you'll pay for that choice. The door opened and closed again. Gabriel walked away, leaving Derek alone in the room, with a death sentence already spoken. He wouldn't live through tonight. The days that followed passed inside Gabriel's penthouse, like a strange dream to Grace. She still wasn't used to the sheer scale of the place, to the glass walls that looked out over all of Los Angeles, glittering at night, to the luxurious silence she had never once tasted. Everything here was a world away from the scraping, struggling life she'd been living for 8 years. Gabriel was busy preparing to face Victor Crane. He met with Marcus and the men closest to him, studied maps, built an attack plan. There were calls that lasted for hours, tense discussions Grace wasn't allowed to sit in on. But no matter how busy he was, Gabriel still made time for her. Every night, he ate dinner with her. Not lavish banquets in expensive restaurants, but simple meals in the penthouse dining room. They talked about ordinary things. About the books Grace had read back when she was still in school. About the dreams she'd abandoned when she had to drop out halfway through. About the small memories of Thomas Sullivan that Gabriel still carried. One afternoon, when Gabriel walked into the living room, he found Grace curled up on the sofa, eyes fixed on an old book she'd discovered on a shelf. She was reading so intently she didn't notice him. Gabriel stood there watching her for a moment, and a faint smile passed over his mouth. The next day, when Grace stepped into her room, she stopped short. On the small table beside her bed sat a stack of brand new books. The very books she'd mentioned in conversation with Gabriel a few days earlier. The ones she'd once dreamed of reading but never had the money to buy. Grace picked one up, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cover. She didn't cry, but something tightened in her throat. No one had cared about her like that since her mother died. No one remembered the small things she said, the dreams she whispered. Gabriel had listened, and he had remembered. That night, as they ate dinner together, Grace looked at Gabriel and spoke softly. Thank you, for the books. Gabriel only gave a small nod and said nothing, but his eyes softened a fraction, and Grace realized that beneath that cold exterior, there was a heart trying to reach. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She walked out to the living room for a glass of water, and found Gabriel standing on the balcony. He'd taken off his jacket and wore only a white shirt, and in the dim light she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Scars. Long, jagged scars running across his back beneath the thin fabric. Grace moved closer. Gabriel turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his face when he saw her. You can't sleep? Grace didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on his back, on the scars that rose and disappeared with the light. From that night? She asked softly. Gabriel understood what she meant. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. The night your father saved me. I took 2 bullets. One in the shoulder, one that grazed my back. If Thomas hadn't shielded me, I would have died. Grace stepped closer. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his back lightly through the fabric of his shirt. Gabriel went still. No one had touched him like that in a long time. Not to attack, not to serve, just to touch. You've carried these scars for 8 years, Grace whispered. Because of my father. Gabriel turned fully to face her. In the balcony's dim light, Grace's green eyes shone like 2 gems, and Gabriel realized he was holding her gaze longer than he needed to. Something was changing between them. An invisible thread was being tied, slowly, quietly. Gabriel didn't know what it was, but he felt it. And looking into Grace's eyes, he knew she felt it too. The ring of his phone shattered the moment. Gabriel broke eye contact and looked at the screen. Marcus, he answered. Boss, everything's ready. We can hit Victor tomorrow. Gabriel nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see him. Good, tomorrow. He ended the call, but he didn't turn back to Grace right away. Something inside him felt heavy. A premonition. A restless unease he couldn't explain. As if a storm was coming, and he didn't know whether he could protect the girl standing behind him. That night, after Grace went to bed, Gabriel sat in his office with Marcus. The desk was covered with maps, satellite images of the warehouse complex where Victor Crane was hiding, and a list of the people who would take part in tomorrow's attack. We have 20 men, Marcus said, his finger marking positions on the map. We'll split into 3 groups. Group 1 blocks the north exit, Group 2 the south, Group 3 breaches through the front. Victor won't have anywhere to run. Gabriel nodded, but his eyes weren't fully on the map. The uneasy feeling from earlier still clung to him like a ghost. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood, in the instincts of a man who had survived hundreds of wars. Boss? Marcus studied him. Is something wrong? Gabriel shook his head. No. Keep going. And then the lights went out. The entire penthouse fell into darkness in an instant. Gabriel and Marcus sprang up at the same time, hands reaching for weapons. Then gunfire exploded. Not one shot, but a barrage. From the stairwell, from the hallway, from everywhere. Glass shattering, screams, bodies hitting the floor. We're under attack, Marcus shouted, drawing his pistol. Gabriel was already moving. He lunged for the office door, shoved it open, and saw hell. His guards were dropping one by one. Dark figures moved fast as specters in the black, suppressed guns spitting deadly flashes. The security system had been disabled. Someone had hacked it from the inside. There was a traitor. Victor's men had been dealt with. Everything had been cleaned up, but Gabriel didn't care about any of that. Marcus, protect Grace, Gabriel shouted as he fired at the attackers. He dropped 1 man, then a second, but there were too many. For every one that fell, 2 more appeared. Marcus fought beside him, but a bullet tore through his right shoulder and made him stagger. Marcus, Gabriel tried to drag his second-in-command back, but in that moment a heavy blow to the back of his head rocked him. Then another, and another. Gabriel went down hard, his gun skidding out of his hand. When he tried to rise, a boot drove into his back, pinning him face down. He was flipped over, his hands bound behind him. When he lifted his head, he saw him. Victor Crane. 8 years had not changed him much. The same angular face, hard lines like stone carving. The same deep black eyes with not a trace of feeling. The same cold smile of a man who savored other people's suffering. He stepped in front of Gabriel, a pistol in his hand. Around him stood the assassins, holding tight to the guards who were still alive. Marcus lay on the floor, blood pouring from his shoulder, his face twisted with pain. Gabriel Mercer, Victor said, his voice like a snake's hiss. 8 years. 8 years I've waited for this moment. Gabriel stared back, his eyes still icy even in defeat. I thought you were dead, Victor. Victor laughed, dry and cruel. You thought so. The whole world thought so. But I'm still alive. I stayed alive for this day. The day I stand here and watch you on your knees at my feet. He stepped closer, raised the gun, and aimed it straight at Gabriel's forehead. Your father died by my hand. I gave the order for that ambush that night. I'm the one who wanted to wipe the Mercer family off the map of Los Angeles. Gabriel clenched his teeth, rage boiling in his veins. And Thomas Sullivan ruined my perfect plan. Victor went on, his voice thick with hatred. He saved you. He let you live. And because of that, I lost everything. My standing, my power. 8 years living like a rat in the dark. He bent down until his face was inches from Gabriel's. But now I'll finish what I started. You will die. And before you die, you will watch Thomas Sullivan's daughter suffer for what her father did to me. Gabriel flinched. Grace, don't touch her, he roared, straining against the restraints. But the men holding him were too strong. Victor laughed loudly. Too late, Gabriel. My people are looking for her right now. In the bedroom at the far end of the hall, Grace jerked awake at the sound of gunfire. Panic hit her. She didn't know what was happening. Survival instinct shoved her forward. Toward the secure room Gabriel had shown her earlier. She sprinted inside, locked the door, her heart hammering out of control. Inside the secure room was a screen showing the security cameras. Grace looked at the screen, and her heart seemed to stop. Gabriel was kneeling on the living room floor, his hands tied. A man she didn't recognize was pointing a gun at his head, and around them were dozens of strangers holding guns. No, Grace whispered, trembling hands pressed to the screen. Gabriel. Grace stood inside the safe room, her eyes locked on the camera screen. She saw Gabriel kneeling on the floor, his hands tied behind his back, the muzzle of a gun aimed straight at his head. She saw Marcus lying motionless in the corner, blood spreading across the floor. She saw the bodies of the guards scattered everywhere, and she saw the man standing in front of Gabriel, a face cold as ice, eyes black and bottomless, stripped of anything human. Through the camera's audio, she heard his voice, each word like a blade carving into her heart. Thomas Sullivan saved you once, Gabriel. He threw himself in front of the bullets for you, gave up his life so you could live. Victor let out a thin, mocking laugh. But he's not here anymore. No one's going to save you tonight. Grace trembled. She took a step back until her spine hit the safe room's icy wall. Her father, the man she'd believed had died in an ordinary truck accident. It turned out he'd given his life to save Gabriel, and now Gabriel was about to die at the hands of her father's enemy. She could stay here. She could hide in this safe room until it was over. She could survive. But Gabriel would die. The man who'd told her the truth about her father would die. The man who'd protected her from Derek would die. The man who'd quietly bought the books she loved, who'd eaten dinner with her every night, who'd looked at her with a gentleness no one had given her since her mother died. He would die, and she would carry that for the rest of her life. The way she'd carried her father's death, the way she'd carried her mother's death. Alone. Always alone. Grace closed her eyes, and her father's image rose in her mind. Thomas Sullivan. She didn't have many memories of him, but she remembered his eyes. The same green eyes she carried, always looking at her with a love so deep it felt endless. He'd died to save someone else. He'd chosen death so someone else could live. That was the man whose blood ran in her veins. That was the legacy he'd left her. Not money, not status, courage. A willingness to sacrifice for someone else. Grace opened her eyes. They weren't shaking anymore. They lit with a resolve she'd never felt before. She turned and scanned the safe room. Gabriel had told her it held everything she needed to survive. Food, water, and weapons. She found it in the lowest cabinet, a handgun. She'd never fired a gun in her life. She didn't know how to aim, how to hold steady, how to control the kick, but she knew how to pull a trigger. And sometimes, that was all it took. Grace picked up the gun, felt its cold weight in her hand. Then she went to the safe room door, drew a long breath, and opened it. The hallway was pitch black. Voices carried from the living room. Grace moved forward, one step at a time, doing everything she could not to make a sound. Her heart was crashing inside her chest, but her feet kept going. When she reached the living room entrance, she heard Victor's voice. "Any last words, Gabriel? Before I send you to meet your father?" Grace didn't wait another second. She stepped out of the darkness, the gun raised high. "Stop!" Every pair of eyes in the room snapped to her. Victor's gunmen, Marcus on the floor, and Gabriel, staring at her with horror blown wide in his eyes. "Grace, don't!" he shouted, but Victor only smiled. He turned to her, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into something like pleasure. "Thomas Sullivan's daughter," he said slowly, savoring each word. "Well, I'll be damned. I was going to come find you, but you came to me. How convenient." Grace aimed the gun at him, her hand trembling but not dropping. "Let him go." Victor burst into laughter. "And what are you going to do? Shoot me? You don't even know how to hold a gun properly." Grace didn't answer. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the room. The bullet didn't hit Victor, but it struck the shoulder of one of his men, standing beside him. Chaos erupted. Victor's gunmen jolted, scrambling to face the new threat, and in that instant, Victor swung his gun toward Grace. He fired. Grace felt a hard punch to her stomach. She looked down and saw blood blooming across her shirt. Then her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor. "Grace!" Gabriel's roar tore through the noise like the cry of a wounded beast. In the chaos, he yanked hard and tore free of the men holding him. At the same time, Marcus, despite his injury, grabbed the gun from a dead guard. He aimed and fired, dropping 2 of Victor's men in an instant. The room became a battlefield, and Grace lay there, blood spilling from her wound, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her lips shaping a question no one heard. "Dad, did I do the right thing?" Gabriel stopped thinking altogether. The fighting instinct that had fed him for more than a decade in the underworld erupted like a fire he could no longer control. He charged Victor with all the strength and fury that had been building inside him for 8 years. Victor didn't even have time to react. Gabriel's first punch landed square in his face and sent him staggering back. The pistol flew from Victor's hand and hit the floor with a cold, metallic clatter. But Victor wasn't weak. He hadn't survived in this world for decades because of luck. He found his balance and drove a counterpunch into Gabriel's jaw. The 2 of them crashed into each other like wild animals. No guns, no knives, only fists and hatred. Gabriel swung. Victor blocked and hit back. Victor kicked. Gabriel dodged and drove a punch into his ribs. They rolled across the floor, slammed into a table, slammed into a wall, blood spraying from the cuts on both their faces. Around them, Marcus and the guards who were still alive were fighting Victor's men. Gunfire, shouting, bodies dropping to the floor. But Gabriel didn't hear any of it. His world narrowed until there was nothing left but the enemy in front of him. "You killed my father," Gabriel roared, driving his fist into Victor's face. "You killed Thomas." Another punch. "You hurt Grace." A third punch sent Victor flat on his back. Gabriel pinned him down, both hands clamping around Victor's throat. Victor struggled, nails raking Gabriel's arms, but Gabriel didn't let go. His eyes were bloodshot, his breathing ragged, his whole body shaking with rage he couldn't contain. Victor was going to die. Gabriel was going to kill him with his own hands. Then he heard it. A faint whisper, so small it was almost swallowed by the chaos around them. But Gabriel heard it, as if that sound had been made for him and him alone. "Did I do the right thing? Like my father?" "Grace." Gabriel turned his head, and his heart felt like someone had squeezed it shut. She was lying there only a few yards away, blood spreading from the wound in her abdomen. Her green eyes stared up at the ceiling, her lips moving, speaking to someone only she could see. Memory hit him like a tidal wave. 8 years ago, Thomas Sullivan in his arms, blood soaking through his shirt, the same green eyes dimming. And the last words Thomas had whispered. "Live, my daughter, Grace." History was repeating itself. Thomas Sullivan's daughter was on the floor, bleeding, asking whether she'd done the right thing. Exactly the way her father had 8 years ago. Gabriel released Victor. Victor didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered now except the girl lying there. Gabriel rushed to Grace, dropped to his knees, and lifted her head onto his thigh. "Grace, Grace, look at me." Those green eyes fluttered, then found his face. She tried to smile, but it was thin and painful. "Are you okay?" she asked in a breath. Gabriel's throat tightened. She was bleeding. She could be dying, and she was asking if he was all right. "I'm fine. You're going to be fine. You hear me? You're going to be fine." He pressed his hand over her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Warm, slick blood ran through his fingers, and Gabriel felt like it was his own blood spilling out. "Call an ambulance!" he shouted to Marcus, who had just taken down Victor's last man. "Now." Marcus nodded, shaking as he pulled out his phone. Gabriel looked back at Grace. She was watching him, her eyes beginning to cloud, still fighting to focus. "My father, he'll be proud, right?" she asked again, weaker than before. Gabriel felt tears rise. "For the first time in 8 years, he cried. "He'll be proud. He'll be so proud," he said, his voice breaking. "But you have to live, Grace. You have to live so I can tell you that every day. Do you hear me?" Grace gave a faint, fragile smile, and then her eyes closed. "Grace, Grace." Gabriel shook her, panic ripping through him, but she was still breathing. Her chest still rose and fell, barely. She'd only passed out from blood loss. The wail of an ambulance siren sounded in the distance, growing closer. Gabriel held Grace against him, refusing to let her out of his sight for even a second. Behind him, Victor Crane lay unmoving on the floor, handcuffed by Marcus. He was still alive, and he would wish he weren't, but that could wait. Right now, There was only Grace. Only the girl with the green eyes in his arms, fighting on the border between life and death. "You're going to be okay," Gabriel whispered, like a prayer, like a vow. "I'm not going to lose you. Not the way I lost your father." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. The paramedics rushed in, lifted Grace onto a stretcher, and began emergency care immediately. Gabriel stood there watching them work, his hands still smeared with her blood, and he felt as if a piece of his soul was lying on that stretcher with her. Before the ambulance pulled away, there was one thing he had to do. Victor Crane lay on the floor, handcuffed by Marcus, his face bruised and swollen from the fight with Gabriel. He was alive, but his right arm and left leg were broken, bone jutting through skin in a grotesque angle. He groaned in pain, and his black eyes still flashed with hatred as he watched Gabriel approach. Gabriel stopped in front of him and looked down at the man who had destroyed his life 8 years ago. The man who killed his father. The man who forced Thomas Sullivan to sacrifice himself. The man who had nearly killed Grace tonight. "You think you won?" Victor spat blood and sneered. "Kill me. End it." Gabriel stared at him, his eyes cold as ice. "Death is too easy for you," he said slowly, each word clear. "You'll live. You'll live a long time. And every day you live, you'll wish you'd died tonight." He turned to Marcus and signaled with his eyes. "Take him. You know what to do." Marcus nodded, hauled Victor up, and dragged him away. Victor's groans echoed through the shattered penthouse, but Gabriel didn't care anymore. He ran outside, jumped into a car, and followed the ambulance, rushing Grace to the hospital. The whole drive, there was only one thought in his mind. She has to live. She has to live. At the hospital, Grace was taken straight into surgery. The doors slammed shut in Gabriel's face, and all he could do was stand there, staring through the small window, watching doctors and nurses swarm around her small body. Then someone drew the curtain, and he couldn't see anything anymore. Gabriel sank onto a plastic chair in the hallway, his head bowed, his hands clasped together. Grace's blood was still on him, dried now into dark brown streaks. He didn't bother to wash it off. He couldn't do anything but sit there and wait. 1 hour passed. 2, 3, 4. Every minute felt like a year. Every time the operating room doors opened, Gabriel's heart seemed to stop, only to start again when he realized it was just a nurse coming out to fetch more supplies. During those 4 hours, Gabriel did something he hadn't done in many years. He prayed. He didn't know who he was praying to. He wasn't a man of faith, but tonight, in a cold hospital corridor, with the sting of disinfectant in his nose and the distant echo of medical machines, he prayed. He prayed for the girl with the green eyes who was fighting to live on the other side of those doors. He prayed for the daughter of the man who had died to save him. He prayed for Grace Sullivan, who had stepped out of the safe room to save him, just as her father had done 8 years ago. Finally, after 4 hours, the operating room doors opened. A doctor stepped out, pulled down his mask, his face tired but not tight with fear. Gabriel shot to his feet and moved straight to him. "How is she?" The doctor looked at him and gave a small nod. The wound was severe. The bullet nearly hit her liver. She lost a lot of blood. He paused, and Gabriel felt as if he might stop breathing. "But she's going to live. She's a strong young woman." Gabriel let out a breath, his legs threatening to give way. "She's going to live. Grace is going to live. Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "She's being moved to recovery. She's not awake yet, but you can stay with her." Gabriel didn't need to hear anything else. He followed a nurse to the recovery room, where Grace lay in a hospital bed. She looked small and fragile, her skin pale, her lips dry, her eyes closed tight. IV lines and heart monitors surrounded her like a web, but her chest still rose and fell. She was still breathing. She was still alive. Gabriel pulled a chair close and sat beside the bed. He reached out and took Grace's small hand in his. Her hand was cold, but he could feel the faint pulse beneath her skin. "I'm here," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere. When you wake up, I'll be here." And he stayed there, never taking his eyes off her, waiting for the moment those green eyes opened again. 2 days passed like 2 years for Gabriel. He didn't leave the hospital, didn't go home, didn't sleep a single full night. He sat in the chair beside Grace's bed, watching her breathe, watching the heart monitor blink in its steady rhythm, and waiting. Every so often a nurse came in to check her, change the IV, write down numbers. They looked at him with concern, urged him to go get some rest, but he only shook his head. He wasn't going anywhere. Not until she woke up. Marcus came by a few times, reporting on what was happening outside. Victor Crane had been moved to a place no one could find. He was still alive, just as Gabriel had promised, but he would wish he'd died every day for the rest of his life. He cared only about the girl lying in the hospital bed in front of him. On the morning of the third day, when sunlight began to slip through the hospital window, Grace opened her eyes. The green of them fluttered a few times, trying to adjust to the light. She stared at the stark white ceiling, then slowly turned her head to the side, and she saw him. Gabriel was sitting in the chair beside the bed, leaning forward, his eyes locked on her. He looked like someone else. Stubble roughened his face from days without shaving. Dark, bruised circles sank under his eyes from lack of sleep. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The most powerful mafia boss in Los Angeles now looked like a man who'd crawled out of hell. Grace tried to speak, but her throat was raw and dry. She swallowed, forced her voice to work, and finally a sentence came out, hoarse but touched with humor. "You look terrible." Gabriel froze for a second, like he didn't believe what he'd heard. Then a breath broke out of his chest, heavy and relieved all at once. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough from days without sleep. "You're awake." He repeated it, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it was real. Grace tried to remember what had happened. Blurred images began to surface in her mind. Gunshots, the safe room, the camera screen, Gabriel on his knees, the gun in her hand, then pain, then darkness. "Victor?" she asked, worry in her voice. Gabriel looked at her, his eyes darkening slightly at the name. "Handled," he said simply. "He'll never hurt anyone again." Grace gave a small nod, feeling something heavy ease off her chest. But there was still one question, a question that had haunted her from the moment she'd pulled the trigger and stepped out of the safe room. "My father," she began, her voice trembling. Would he be proud? Gabriel looked at her, and in his eyes was something Grace had never seen before. Softness, gentleness, and maybe a tear he was trying hard not to let fall. "He'd scold you," Gabriel said, his voice catching. "He'd scold you for being reckless, for walking out of safety to face a killer, for nearly getting yourself killed." He paused, swallowing hard. "But yes, he'd be proud. You did what he did 8 years ago. You saved me. You sacrificed yourself to protect someone else. Thomas Sullivan would be proud of his daughter. And I—" He stopped, unable to finish. But Grace understood. She understood what he couldn't say out loud. She reached out, her hand weak and trembling, but it found its way to his. Gabriel took her hand immediately, gripping it as if he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. "Thank you," Grace whispered, "for telling me the truth about my father, for protecting me, for being here." Gabriel didn't speak. He only held her hand tighter, fingers weaving into hers, like a promise that didn't need words. They sat there in silence as morning light spilled through the window, laying a warm golden layer over them both. They didn't need anything else. Sometimes silence said more than any language ever could. And in that moment, they both knew something had changed between them. An invisible thread had been tied, a thread made of blood, of sacrifice, of tears, and of something neither of them dared to name yet. The days that followed moved through the hospital like a strange dream for Grace. She recovered little by little, the wound beginning to knit, the pain easing under medication, and the steady care of the medical team. But what surprised her most wasn't how quickly her body healed. It was Gabriel. He didn't leave. Through all the days she lay in that hospital bed, he was there, right beside her. He slept in the chair next to her bed, even though it was hard and uncomfortable. He ate the bland hospital meals, the same as she did. He read to her when she was tired. He helped her take her first steps again when the doctor finally allowed it. The most powerful mafia boss in Los Angeles had turned into a devoted caretaker, and Grace didn't know what to make of it. One afternoon, as the sunlight outside the window began to fade, Gabriel sat in his familiar chair and watched Grace leaning back against her pillows, reading one of the books he'd brought her. She looked stronger now, a hint of color back in her cheeks, the green in her eyes bright again. "Grace," he said, breaking the silence. She looked up and set the book down. "Yeah?" Gabriel studied her for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then he spoke, his voice low and slow. "You saved me, the way your father did 8 years ago." Grace gave a small smile, tilting her head. "So we're even?" Gabriel shook his head, serious. "No, we're not even. Your father saved me once, and I owed him my whole life. Now you saved me again. Now I owe you a life too." Grace was quiet for a moment, looking at him. Then she let out a breath, her green eyes turning deeper. "I don't want you to owe me," she said, gentle but certain. "I didn't save you so you'd owe me. I saved you because—" She stopped, not knowing how to explain it. Because he'd told her the truth about her father. Because he'd protected her from Derek. Because he'd bought her the books she loved. Because he'd eaten dinner with her every night and talked about ordinary things. Because when she saw him on his knees with a gun at his head, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. "Then what do you want?" Gabriel asked, his voice softer now, his eyes never leaving her. Grace looked at him for a long time. She thought about the last 8 years. 8 years living alone after her father died. 6 years caring for her sick mother, and then watching her slip away. Years of working herself raw to pay down debt, with no one beside her, no one to lean on. She had grown used to loneliness. She had believed she would be lonely forever. "I want to not be alone anymore," she said, a whisper, but each word clear. "For 8 years, I've been alone. When my father died, I was alone. When my mother got sick, I cared for her alone. When my mother died, I buried her alone. When Derek tormented me, I endured it alone. I'm so tired." She lifted her eyes to his, tears brightening them. "I don't need you to owe me. I just need to not be alone anymore." Gabriel didn't speak for a long time. He only looked at her, his eyes deep and dark, yet something inside them was starting to glow. Then he reached out, took her hand, and held it tight. "You won't be alone," he said, his voice low and steady like a vow. "Not ever again." Grace looked down at his hand holding hers, felt the warmth and the steadiness in his fingers. There was no kiss, no grand confession, no pretty promises. Only 2 hands clasped tight, 2 sets of eyes meeting, and a promise that didn't need to be dressed up in words. Outside the window, the sun was sinking, painting the sky in a fierce orange. The light spilled into the hospital room and laid a warm golden color over them both. Grace looked out, then looked back at Gabriel, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something different waiting ahead. Not darkness, not loneliness, not despair, but light, hope. Someone holding her hand and telling her she would never have to be alone again. 3 months later, Grace stood in front of the mirror in her room at the penthouse, looking at her own reflection. The scar on her abdomen had healed, leaving only a faint line that would stay with her for the rest of her life. But she didn't hate it. It was proof of the night she chose to stand up, chose to fight, chose to become the daughter her father would be proud of. She had recovered completely, not only physically, but in spirit too. 3 months living in Gabriel's penthouse, being cared for, being protected, being loved, had healed wounds that 8 years of loneliness had carved into her. She was no longer the trembling girl in the employee break room, crying alone because she had no other choice. She had changed. And it wasn't only her. 1 week after Grace left the hospital, Gabriel handed her an envelope. Inside was confirmation that the debt of $127,000 had been paid in full. Grace refused at first, saying she couldn't accept that kind of money. But Gabriel only looked at her and said one sentence. "This is the loyalty fund your father earned. He worked for my family more than 20 years. This is what he should have received a long time ago." Grace couldn't argue with that logic, and deep down, she knew Gabriel was right. Her father had sacrificed his life. No amount of money, no matter how large, could repay that sacrifice. With the financial burden lifted, Grace could finally do what she had dreamed of for 6 years. She returned to college, enrolled in the remaining credits she needed to earn her degree. This time, she didn't have to work 3 jobs at once to cover tuition. This time, she could focus on school, on her future, on what she wanted to become. Gabriel still ran his empire. He was still the powerful boss Los Angeles had reason to fear. But something in him had changed. The people closest to him noticed it. Marcus noticed. Jake noticed. He was still cold, still decisive, still ruthless when he needed to be. But sometimes, in the middle of tense meetings, he would glance at his phone, and a faint smile would pass over his lips. Sometimes he would come home earlier than usual, just to make it back in time for dinner with the girl with the green eyes. Tonight, Grace stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out at Los Angeles glittering with lights below. A soft wind moved through, carrying the chill of late night. But she didn't feel cold. She felt peaceful. A feeling she'd believed she would never have. Light footsteps sounded behind her, and Grace didn't need to turn to know who it was. Gabriel came to stand beside her and handed her a glass of wine. She took it, sipped a small mouthful, and they stood there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, looking in the same direction, understanding each other without needing words. After a long while, Grace spoke, her voice light as the wind. "What happens next?" Gabriel looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "I don't know," he admitted. "What do you want?" Grace turned to him, her green eyes bright in the night. She thought about the last 3 months, About the dinners they shared, about the books he bought for her, about the nights they sat on this balcony talking until late about everything and nothing at all, about the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world, about how she felt when she was with him. Safe, valued, no longer alone. "I want," she began, then stopped, searching for the right words. Then she smiled, gentle and honest. "I want to try." Gabriel watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a rare smile blooming on his mouth. "Then we'll try." They turned back to the city, shoulders still touching, wine glasses in their hands. No grand promises, no blazing declarations of love, just two people who had walked through darkness, who had lost, who had hurt, and who were now standing beside each other, ready to step into a new chapter. To the east, the horizon began to brighten. A new day was about to begin, and for the first time in a long time, both Grace and Gabriel were looking forward to it. Because sometimes, a blood debt doesn't have to be repaid with blood. It can be repaid with a chance to live again, and to love. This story shows us that in life, no matter how dark your circumstances become, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Grace lost her father, lost her mother, carried a massive financial burden, was exploited and threatened, but she never gave up. And Gabriel, even though he lived in the brutal world of the Mafia, still held on to gratitude and loyalty to the man who saved his life. The most important message this story wants to share is the power of human connection. No one can live alone forever. We all need someone beside us, to share with, to lean on, to walk through the longest nights together. If you're going through a difficult time, remember, you're not alone. Open your heart, trust, and allow others into your life. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, share this video with the people you love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to listen to more meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Was there a detail that moved you? Was there a moment that made you think about your own life? Leave a comment below. We truly want to hear what's in the deepest part of your heart. Goodbye and see you in the next video. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and a life filled with love every single day.